I had eaten the heel of the loaf my whole life, and I want you to understand that this was not a complaint. The heel is the end of the bread, the hard part. The crust nobody reaches for, and in a kitchen full of people hungrier and higher than me, getting the part nobody wanted was, most days, the closest thing to safety I had. You cannot lose what no one else is trying to take. I had built an entire life on that principle, and it had kept me alive, and it had taught me, very young, the great Omega lesson: want little and be useful, and you may be permitted to remain. I was 24, a woman grown by any law you care to name, and I ran the lower kitchens of the King's Keep in the way that the lowest things run the most important ones, invisibly, and without which nothing would happen. I kept the keys to the larders and the cold stores. I knew which children stole because they were wicked, and which stole because they were hungry, and I fed the second kind out of my own portion, and let them think they had got away with it. There was one in particular, a boy called Fen, 6 years old, and orphaned by a winter fever that took both his parents and left him with nothing but a place at the very bottom of the pack and a habit of attaching himself to whoever did not kick him. He had attached himself to me. I had not asked for it. You do not, in my experience, get asked. He slept by my hearth and followed me through my work and called me by no title because he had decided, with the flat certainty of a child, that I did not need one, and I let him, because a person who has spent her life being no one to anyone discovers she has no defense at all against being someone to a child. I tell you about the bread and the boy because they are the whole of it, really. Everything that happened because of who got to eat and who went without, and because of a child who should have been allowed to be hungry in peace. The king I knew the way the kitchen knows the king, as weather, as law. Magnus of the Iron Territories ruled by a single principle, and the principle was that the law did not bend, not for rank, not for blood, not for the king's own mood. He had taken the throne young and held it through 3 challenges and a border war, and he had built his whole reign on a reputation so hard you could have struck flint off it, that he was utterly, terribly fair, and that he had never once in 9 years of rule spoken the word that overturns a sentence. Pardon. He did not pardon. The law spoke, and the law was obeyed, and the king was the law's servant before he was anyone's master. The pack loved him for it, the way you love a thing you are also afraid of. It is, I have learned, a very common way to love. I had seen him perhaps 4 times in my life, always from a distance, always from below. I did not expect the 5th time to be the one where I lied to his face, and he let me. It began with the strongbox. The border tithe went missing on a grey morning at the turn of the season, a strongbox of silver, the pack's payment to the warriors who held the eastern passes, kept in the muniment room behind a lock that 3 people in the whole keep could open. It was gone between one dusk and the next, lock untouched, and a keep that runs on the king's iron fairness does not lose a strongbox quietly. By midday there were guards in every corridor. By dark there was a culprit. The culprit was Fen. I will tell you how a 6-year-old becomes a thief of border silver, because it is a small ugly lesson in how the world disposes of the people it has already decided are disposable. A single coin from the box was found in the boy's pocket. 1 coin, of a make and mint that matched the missing tithe. He could not say where he had got it. Children of 6 rarely can, and he was small and low, and orphaned, and unbothersome to blame, and the keep needed a hand to point at before the warriors of the eastern passes heard that their pay had walked off on its own. A child cannot lift a strongbox. Everyone knew that. It did not matter. They did not need him to have lifted it. They needed him to be the loose thread that, pulled, would unravel into a confession of accomplices. And they meant to pull him until he unravelled, and he was 6. I knew where the coin had come from, because I had seen it given. A fine man in a fine cloak, 2 days before, flicking a coin to the kitchen boy who fetched his horse, the casual cruelty of the powerful, who scatter silver the way they scatter everything, without once thinking who picks it up or what it will cost them. I had not known then that the coin was tithe silver. I knew it now. And I knew, with the cold certainty of someone who has watched justice work from underneath her whole life, that a child could not survive the kind of questioning they meant to do, and that the truth, a great lord, a careless coin, would never be allowed to be the truth, because the truth was too highly born to be guilty, and the boy was too low to be spared. So I did the arithmetic that omegas are very good at. A child cannot bear it. I can. I have borne everything else. And I went to the hall on the day of judgment, and when they brought the boy out small and shaking before the whole court, and the charge was read, I stepped forward out of the crowd where no one had thought to look at me, and I said, in a voice I made, come out steady, that the boy was innocent, and that I had taken the strongbox, and that I had given him the coin myself. I had a story ready. I had built it the night before the way I build a fire, piece by careful piece. I said I had taken the box out of the muniment room while it stood open for the steward's count, that I had carried it out through the kitchen yard and over the low wall by the midden in the dark, that I had hidden the silver and kept 1 coin and given it to the boy because he was hungry and I was a fool. It was a good story. It accounted for everything. It had a guilty woman and an innocent child and a motive a court could understand, which is to say a low and shameful one, and it asked the powerful to believe only what they already believed, that an omega would steal and lie and drag a child into it. I want to tell you I was brave. I was not brave. I was doing the only thing my whole life had trained me to do, which was to make myself the part nobody would miss. The hall believed me. I watched it believe me. I watched the relief move through the court, order restored, a culprit found, the unbearable possibility of a high-born thief folded back into its box. The steward nodded. The captain nodded. The judgment clerk took up his pen to write the sentence, and the sentence for the theft of the warrior's silver was not a whipping or a branding. It was the gallows. I had known that when I stepped forward. I want that understood too. I did the arithmetic with the gallows in it, and the arithmetic still came out the same, because a child cannot bear it, and I had already borne everything else. And the whole time, on the high dice, the king said nothing. I had not dared look at him while I lied, but I felt him. You feel a still thing in a moving room. He sat through my confession, without a word, without a flicker, a dark, unmoving weight at the top of the hall, and I thought, with what I had left for thinking, that of course he said nothing, that the law did not bend, that I had handed his iron fairness exactly the meal it lived on, and he would let it eat. The king, who had never pardoned anyone, was not going to begin with me. The clerk read the sentence aloud. Death, by the rope, at dawn. And the king stood up. He did it without haste, which was somehow worse than haste. The whole hall turned to him the way iron filings turn to a lodestone. He came to the edge of the dies, and he looked down at me, not at the court, not at the boy, at me, and for one moment the famously unbending face did something I had no name for. because no one had ever looked at me with it before. It was not pity. Pity I knew. This was closer to fury, and closer still to something underneath the fury that I would spend a long time learning to read. "Hold," he said. One word. The hall stopped breathing on it. "Bring the woman to me." The sentence waits. The law had never waited for anyone. It waited that day, and I stood in the wreckage of my own careful arithmetic, having gambled my life to save a child, and apparently won something I had not bet on, and the single thought I had room for was not relief and was not fear. It was, "He is not stopping this for mercy." I do not know that face, but I know it is not mercy. I was right. It would be some time before I understood how right, and what the truth was instead, and why the most frightening thing in that hall had not been the gallows at all. They did not return me to the kitchens, and they did not take me to a cell. They took me to a small stone room off the king's own council chamber, and they left me there with a guard and a fire, and after a while a plate of bread with the soft middle still in it, which I did not touch, because a woman who has just confessed to a hanging offence does not trust a kindness she did not earn. Fen was safe. Leif, the king's second, a broad, quiet man with a soldier's scars and the only gentle eyes I had seen in that hall, had told me so at the door, low, almost kind. The boy was returned to the kitchens unharmed, the charge against him struck. Whatever happened to me now, that part had held. I had bought the thing I came to buy. I sat with that and found it was enough to sit with. The king came at dusk. He came alone, which I would later understand was itself a kind of statement, and he shut the door on his own guard, and he stood across the small room and looked at me with the iron face, and he said, without greeting, without preamble, the thing I had not expected anyone in that keep to be clever enough or cruel enough to say. "You did not take the strongbox. I had a great many lies left in me. I want that on the record. I was not done. I confessed," I said, "before your whole court. I gave you the root and the wall and the coin." "You gave me a wall," he agreed. "You said you carried it over the low wall by the midden." The strongbox left through the muniment passage, which has not been opened by anyone below the rank of steward in the 9 years of my reign, because it cannot be. The lock is keyed to the household officers, and to me, and to no one else, and certainly not to a woman who keeps the larder keys. He let that sit. "You confessed to a theft committed by a route you do not have the keys to use. You described carrying alone, over a wall, in the dark, a box that takes 2 men to lift. Every word of your confession was a lie, and not a clever one. You are not a clever liar. You are something far more dangerous in a court like mine, which is an honest woman who has decided to lie for a reason she thinks is worth her neck." The iron face did not change. "I want to know the reason. And I want to know it before I decide what to do with the fact that you have just lied to me in front of my entire kingdom, and I let you." I looked at him for a long moment. The fire popped. Somewhere below us, a kitchen I had run my whole life was getting on without me. "You knew," I said slowly. "You knew while I was saying it. You sat there and you let me read out my own death sentence, and you knew every word was false." "Yes," said the king. "Then you are crueler than your reputation," I said, "and your reputation is not kind." And I watched the most powerful wolf in the territories receive that from a kitchen omega without so much as blinking, and file it somewhere, and not deny it. I had just told the king of the Iron Territories to his face, in a locked room, with a hanging still hanging over me, that his reputation was not kind, and he had not denied it, which I was either going to live to be proud of, or not live at all. Let me catch my breath there a moment, and you catch yours. If you are still with me in this strange little room, I would love to know where you are listening from tonight, and whether you have ever told a powerful person the true thing everyone else was too frightened to say. Tell me after in the comments. And if this has its hooks in you, follow along. There is a great deal of it left, and the part that is coming is the one I think about most. Tell me the reason, he said again, and because I was tired, and because the lie had failed anyway, and because there is a particular freedom in having nothing left to protect but the truth, I told him. I told him about Fen. About the fever winter. About a child who cannot bear the questioning they meant to do, and an Omega who has borne everything else. And the arithmetic that comes out the same, no matter how many times you run it, when one of the numbers is a 6-year-old. I told him I had seen the coin given, a fine man, a fine cloak, a careless flick of silver to the boy who fetched his horse, and that I had not known then it was tithe silver and knew now, and that I had stepped forward because the truth of who had really scattered that coin was too highly born to ever be allowed to be the truth, and a low thing was going to hang for it. And if a low thing had to hang, then better the one who had chosen it than the one who was 6. I did not name the man. I want that remembered. I did not know his name, and I would not have given it if I had, because I had no proof but my own eyes, and the word of an Omega against a great cloak is not a thing that has ever once, in the history of the world, gone well for the Omega. The king listened without moving. When I finished, the silence went on long enough that I began to be afraid of it. You stepped forward, he said finally, to hang in the place of a child who is nothing to you, on the strength of a truth you cannot prove, against a man you will not name. He is not nothing to me, I said. That is the whole of the misunderstanding, I think. You keep saying it as if it settles something. He sleeps by my hearth. He is mine the way the bread is mine, the part nobody else wanted, that I took because no one was reaching for it, and have ended by loving more than the soft middle anyone would have fought me for. I heard the thing come out the wrong door, the way it always does with me, and I did not call it back. You would not understand. You have never in your life had to eat the heel of anything. Something happened in his face then. Not softening, I would not insult either of us by calling it that. It was more like the look of a man who has been speaking a language his whole life and just heard a word in it he did not know was there. He turned away from me. He went to the small window and stood with his back to me, and when he spoke again his voice had changed, gone quieter and harder at once, the way a thing goes when you have stopped performing it. Do you know why I stood up, he said. It was not a question. The court thinks I stood for mercy. By morning the whole keep will be saying the Iron King went soft for a kitchen Omega with a sad face. They are wrong. I did not stand for you. He turned back. I stood because your lie was the first true thing I have heard in this hall in 3 years. You told me the box went over the wall, and I knew it went through the passage, and there are exactly 4 men alive who can open that passage, and I have suspected for a season that one of them is selling the warriors silver out from under me to a pack that means to take the eastern passes, and I could prove nothing and trust no one. And I have been drowning in it alone, because a king who cannot trust his own officers cannot say so out loud without inviting the very challenge he fears. The iron cracked, just there, just for me. And then a woman I have never met stood up in my hall and lied to die for a child, and named the wrong route so badly that she pointed straight at the right one. And I watched a certain face in my court go loose with relief while she did it. You did not save the boy with your confession. You handed me the man. I stood up because you are the most useful accident that has happened to my reign, and because—" He stopped. "Because?" I said, "Because I have never once in my life been able to leave a closed door alone. Because no one," he said, "has done a selfless thing in front of me in so long that I had begun to believe the trait extinct. And I find I cannot have you hanged for being the proof it is not. After that I was not a prisoner, exactly, and I was not free, exactly. I was the king's witness, which in a court like his is a thing more dangerous than either. And he kept me close because the man I had pointed at without naming was a man he could not yet touch. The man was Lord Dacian. He was the king's own cousin, and he was everything the king was not. Easy where Magnus was iron, charming where Magnus was still, a man who wore power like a fine cloak instead of a chain. I knew him the moment I saw him in the council, because his was the fine cloak from the kitchen yard, his the careless hand that had flicked a child the coin that nearly hanged him. He smiled at me when we were introduced, the open, generous smile of a man who has never once been refused anything, and he said how very brave I had been, how moving, how fortunate that the king, in his wisdom, had seen fit to spare such a loyal creature. And under the smile his eyes did the cold arithmetic I knew so well, because I had spent my life being counted by men like him, and what they came to was, this one saw something. This one is a loose thread. He moved against me within the week, and he did it in open council, gently, the way clever men do their cruelest things. He observed with great delicacy that the realm had watched an Omega confess to the theft of the warrior's silver, and that the warriors of the eastern passes, hard men, owed their pay, would not understand why that confessed thief now sat at the king's elbow, unpunished. That the king's famous fairness was the spine of the realm, and that to bend it for a pretty story of a child was to tell every pack on the border that the iron law had a soft place, and a soft place is where the knife goes in. That justice, however sad, demanded the sentence be carried out, for the good of the realm. With all love. It nearly worked. I felt it nearly work. I had heard that exact music before, in a hall where I had been the one it played for, and I watched it move through the council the same way, the hard, practical men nodding, the logic of it closing like a door, the gallows I had, cheated, swinging quietly back toward me. He had found the one argument that could kill me, using the king's own reputation as the rope. If Magnus spared me now, he was the soft king his cousin had just described. If he hanged me, the thread was cut, and Dacian was safe, and a child's rescuer died for the crime of having seen. I understood, sitting there, that Dacian did not need me guilty. He needed me dead. A confessed thief who hangs is an answer. A confessed thief who lives is a question someone might one day think to ask. The king did not hang me, and he did not free me, and I learned in those weeks what the proud king's pride actually was, underneath the iron. It was not vanity. It was a wall he had built around a single unbearable fact, which was that he was alone. He ruled a kingdom and trusted no living soul in it, because every soul in it wanted something from him, and he had decided long ago that the only safe thing to want was nothing, and the only safe thing to be was fair, because fairness asks nothing of anyone's love. He had made himself into a law so that he would never again have to be a man anyone could disappoint. And it had worked. It had worked perfectly. He was the most respected, most feared, most utterly solitary creature in the territories, and his own cousin was robbing him blind and plotting his border out from under him, and he had no one at all. he could say it to. Until a kitchen omega lied to die for a child, and turned out to want nothing from him but the boy's safety, which he had already given. I was, I think, the first person he had met in a decade who could not possibly be after anything. I had confessed to a hanging offence for free. There was no angle in me. He did not know what to do with that, and so he did the only thing his armoured life had left him able to do. He put me to work. He had me describe the coin, the cloak, the day, again and again. He walked me through the muniment passage, and the count, and the household officers. He treated my eyes, my low, invisible Omega's eyes that had watched the powerful from underneath for 20 years, as the one instrument in his keep he could trust, precisely because no one had ever thought me worth lying in front of. And somewhere in those long, careful evenings, bent over the same problem in the firelight, the iron came off him by degrees. He told me things. Small at first, the border, the warriors, the arithmetic of holding a kingdom that wants to be let go of. Then, less small. That his father had been betrayed by a brother, and that he had watched it as a boy, and decided that the only cure for a knife in the back was to give no one your back. That he had not spoken a true word to anyone in so long he had forgotten the shape of his own voice doing it. He said it to me, the part nobody reaches for, because I was safe the way the heel is safe. No one was trying to take me, so he could set himself down. You realize, I told him one night, blunt as a dropped pan, because someone had to be, that you have built your whole reign on the idea that the law cannot bend, and the very first time it mattered, you bent it. For me, in front of everyone, your great iron principle lasted exactly until a real person stood in front of it. The court would have died of fright to hear an Omega say it. He only looked at me, the firelight finding the grey at his temples, and said, "Yes, that is not a failure," I said, gentler than I meant to be. "That is the most human thing I have ever heard about you. The law that cannot bend is not justice, it is just another wall. You have spent 9 years confusing the two." He did not answer that. But the next morning he ate the heel of the loaf at the high table in front of the whole court, deliberately watching me while he did it, and I had to leave the hall to laugh, where the king's dignity could not see me do it. Dacian made his real move when he understood he was losing the king, when he saw the iron cousin he had counted on to be predictable start asking questions a predictable man would not ask. He did not wait to be exposed. Careful men never do, and Dacian was charming, which is only careful with better teeth. He went for the proof, and the proof was Fen. The boy had seen more than a coin. I had not known it. The king had drawn it out of the child gently, over days, the way you coax a wild thing, that the fine man in the cloak had not only flicked him silver, but had sent him, twice, to carry a sealed pouch down to a rider waiting at the river gate. A small errand for a small boy who could be trusted, because no one notices a kitchen child. Fen had carried Dacian's treason in his own 2 hands, and never known it, and Fen could describe the rider, and the rider was the thread that tied Dacian to the pack across the border, and Dacian knew the child had carried the pouches because Dacian had handed them to him. He came for the boy at dusk, in the kitchen yard, where it had all started. I was there because I was always there. They had let me back to my kitchens under the king's protection, and I had gone gladly, and Fen was at my hearth, and Dacian came through the low door with that open, generous smile and a blade held against his own forearm where the yard could not see it, and asked, so pleasantly, whether he might borrow the boy a moment. I have been asked since what I was thinking, putting myself and a kitchen knife between a war-trained lord and the child at my hearth. The honest answer is that I was not thinking. There are things below thinking. I had done the arithmetic once already, in a hall full of people, with the gallows in it, and it had come out the same. And it came out the same again now, with a blade in it. A child cannot bear this, and I have borne everything else. He stays, I said, and I put Fen behind me, and I held my little knife the way a cook holds a knife, which is badly, for fighting, and well, for meaning it. Dacian stopped smiling. "You stupid creature," he said, almost sad. "I gave you a hanging that would have been quick. You should have taken it." And he came at me, not at the boy, at me, because I was the one in the way, and clever men remove what is in the way. And the blade came down, and I got my arm up, and a line of cold opened along it bright and clean, and I felt my own blood come hot over the cold, and I did not move from in front of the child. I had spent my life getting out of everyone's way. I did not get out of his. Then the yard was full of the king. Leif had been watching the boy on the king's order, and Leif had run for Magnus the moment Dacian crossed the yard, and the king came through the kitchen door, not as a king, but as a wolf, the great dark shape of him filling the low room, and Dacian, who had counted on a predictable cousin, who had counted on an Iron Man being too proud to ever come to a kitchen, went down under 300 pounds of the most powerful creature in the territories, with my blood still wet on his blade. They took him alive. The king wanted him alive, and a king who has finally decided to bend his law has a great deal of use for a living traitor with a rider at the river gate to be questioned. Dacian talked, in the end. They always do, the charming ones, when the smile stops working. The rider was taken, and the pack across the border that had meant to buy the eastern passes with the warriors' own silver found their plan in chains, and the warriors of the eastern passes were paid, and the whole rotten thread that had begun with a careless coin flicked at a hungry child was pulled all the way out into the light, and it was pulled out by an Omega's low invisible eyes and a 6-year-old's honest mouth, which is a thing the great wolves of that keep had a difficult time forgiving and a more difficult time forgetting. The turn, when it came clear, was the one none of us had let ourselves see, though all of us should have. The whole court had spent weeks believing the Iron King stood up that day out of mercy, that the unbending law had finally bent for a soft reason, a pretty confession, a kitchen girl. It had not bent for mercy at all. It had bent because the most honest creature in the realm had told the most useful lie in it, and a man who trusted no one had recognized, in a stranger willing to die for free, the one thing his armored life had taught him did not exist. He had not spared me. He had been saved by me, which is a different thing entirely, and a far harder one for a proud man to say out loud. He said it anyway. That was the thing that undid the court, in the end, more than the traitor in chains. The Iron King stood up in his own hall a second time, and this time with Dacian kneeling, and the truth laid bare, and the gallows that had waited for me now empty. He told them that his law had very nearly hanged an innocent woman for the crime of being too low to be believed, that an Omega had seen what his whole council had missed, and borne what his own blood had tried to make a child bear, that he had built his reign on the idea that fairness asked nothing of love, and that he had been wrong, and that he would rather be a king who could be disappointed than a wall that could not be reached. And then he said the word he had never once said in 9 years of rule. He looked at me, in front of all of them, and he pardoned me, fully, formally, the word ringing in a hall that had never heard him speak it, for a crime I had not committed and a lie I had told to save a child. And he made it sound, somehow, less like a mercy granted than a debt acknowledged. The kiss came later, and I will keep the most of it, because some things are mine. I will tell you only that it was in the kitchen yard, of all the undignified places, with the bread cooling on the sill, and Fen pretending very hard to be asleep by the hearth, and not at all watching through one eye. And that when it ended I understood for the first time that the heel of the loaf had never been the part nobody wanted. It had only been the part nobody had looked at properly, as had I. He said my name like it was a sentence he had decided, after 9 careful years, that he wanted to overturn. A year on, the children of the keep eat the soft middle of the bread first. It is a small thing. The court thinks it is a charming eccentricity of the new Luna, and lets me have it the way you let a strange woman have her one harmless rule, and does not understand that it is the whole of my reign in a single loaf, that in this keep, now, the lowest and the smallest are not the ones who go without, and that I will burn the place down before I let it slide back. They are coming to understand it slowly. They come to most of what I do slowly. They came to me slowly too, and a mega-cook at the head of their table, and they came in the end for the reason Pax always come around to anything, which is that their king had chosen it, and their king had never once chosen wrong about people, except, he says, about himself, for 9 years, until a liar in his hall set him straight. Leif is the captain of the king's guard now, and complains that I have made the king soft, and would not have it any other way. Decian is a name no one says, stripped and exiled past the borders, which for a man who lived on being charming is a death longer than the rope. Fen is 7, and reading, and last week brought me a square of parchment on which he had written, in the painful, careful hand of a child who has decided a thing matters, a single line. It said, "You are mine the way the bread is yours." He had heard me say it once in the small stone room, and kept it, the way children keep the things the rest of us are careless with. I have it still. I will have it always. It is the only document in this whole keep I would walk back into a burning hall to save, and I have, against everything they taught me, stopped pretending otherwise. Magnus still sits some nights at the high table in the dark, the way proud solitary men do, and I still find him there, and I bring 2 heels of the loaf, and we eat the part nobody else wanted together. Which is, I have come to think, the truest thing 2 people who spent their lives going without can do. The iron came off him by degrees and did not come back. He is not a soft king. He is something better, which is a fair one, who finally learnt the difference between a law and a wall, and I am the proof he keeps of it, the way I once kept a coin and a careful lie. So tell me, when he stood up in that hall, did you think it was mercy? Most of them did. I did, for one cold moment before I learned better. And wherever you are tonight, whatever heel of whatever loaf you have been quietly eating so that someone smaller could have the soft middle, I see you. I was you. Tell me where you are listening from, and if this kept you company. Stay a while and follow along. There is bread enough now, and a place set low at the table for whoever else the world has decided it would not miss.